on a very cold and very early morning. We'll talk about the mood across corporate India as well as global business leaders in just a bit. But we are here to talk about an issue that we've been trying to mainstream on CNBC-TV18 on why investing in parity makes good economic sense. I have with me a brilliant star cast, Roshni Nadar Malhotra. Thanks very much for joining us. Bob Moritz, the Global CEO of PwC, and Anish, the Group CEO of Mahindra and Mahindra. It's always a pleasure to speak with the three of you. Thank you very much for joining us. As I said, it's cold, but let's get a temperature check going, Bob. You released the 27th annual CEO survey that PwC puts out in Davos every year. What's the mood like?
I think what you see this year in Davos and from the CEO community is less pessimism compared to last year, significantly less, with a lot more, I'll call it stability in the macroeconomic environment. But there's a little bit more optimism, but it's fragile. And so we've got a number of headwinds that are underway. But the good news here, especially for your audience, is that India is the standout. The degree of confidence from the Indian CEOs on the Indian economy, the optimism of the CEOs in India on their own ability to raise revenues in the next 12 months is #1 when we look at all the various discussions. It's fantastic. Yeah. And again, that goes to, I think, the continued momentum that people see there and the opportunities that exist.
You know, so Indian CEOs confident about the next 12 months, 86% believe that things will be better than they were the previous year. But what about the global take as far as India is concerned, as an attractive FDI destination, as one of the top 5 destinations as per the survey?
Yeah, the CEO survey focuses on where would you invest other than your home country. And India has continued to rise quite a bit. And the anecdotal evidence amongst the CEO community is a significant rise in terms of mindset and top of mind relevant to their capital deployment. And you see 3 opportunities. One is the continued rise of the consumer in India that needs to be served. Second is the ability to invest in India from a perspective of the supply chain opportunities that exist as organizations try to diversify their supply chain, automate it, and make it more greener. And last but not least is the ability for India to continue to serve the world and operate more globally as well. So there's a lot more upside and a lot more top of mind for the CEOs around the world about India.
So Roshni, let's talk about that, the opportunities that exist for India. Indian tech, of course, here on the promenade and has been for the last few years. You're coming off a very strong quarter at HCLTech with a market cap crossing 50 billion. But, you know, what's the mood like here in terms of expectation on discretionary spends, on whether there is likely to be any pause on spending? What are you picking up at this point in time?
Thank you. So I think there is cautious optimism, and while discretionary spend and some of those decisions are a little pushed on, but there is definitely investment taking place. I think there is definitely looking at India as not just a destination where we have IT services, but as a strategic location. So I think the ability for our industry to be able to participate in those conversations with our global clients, but also growing the client base in India, because you know, industry is picking up. It's not just a thrust by public infrastructure, but it's also what's happening privately amongst organizations. So I think that cautious optimism, but yeah, I think that we're hoping that the worst is behind us.
And that certainly would be the hope for a lot of CEOs at this point in time. Anish, you know, your conversations, what are you picking up? What's the read?
In all the conversations, there has been a lot of optimism on India. And I can say that over the years, I've seen that change fairly dramatically. And even compared to last year, there's significantly more optimism because people are seeing India as a long-term market. They're also seeing India as a supply chain hub, not necessarily an alternative to China. It is a hub standalone in itself. And the questions now are, how can we come to India and make it work? Because we want to be there in the long term.
Yes, we want to be there in the long term. But Bob, you know, of the many challenges that the world faces today and global leaders need to address, investing in gender-balanced organizations, investing in creating equal opportunity workplaces, how much of a priority is that for global CEOs, for global boardrooms today?
So it is a top priority. The challenge is I think it gets crowded out in terms of the topics get discussed. Having said that, when you look at the time and energy that the management teams are spending on that, it's quite a bit. And the reality is, when you look at the accountability that organizations are now starting to have, particularly in the societal aspects, it's going to be even more important going forward. You see rules and regulations around the world coming in that are going to require people to disclose what do you do and are you making progress, coupled with what are your goals looking forward. So the concept of equality and inclusion are top of mind right now, and I think organizations are continuing to make a lot of momentum there, but it's still not enough. We have to recognize the realities of the numbers. And that's one of the things I think we find organizations do, is that there's too much anecdotal conversation, not factual conversations in terms of the numbers from a recruiting perspective, a pay equity perspective, a promotional perspective. And that's where you actually can be very focused in terms of what actions to take, actions with data.
You know, I'm glad that you pointed out, because you're absolutely right. A lot of it gets sort of discussed anecdotally, but not enough data. In fact, that's one of the things that we're trying to do, is put data together on the changes that have happened across India. But what kinds of targets, if at all, is PwC willing to put as far as creating a more gender balanced organization is concerned?
We start from the top. So there's a couple of things that we do. One is we have a target in terms of what we want to do relevant to the representation for better inclusion around the world in our leadership teams and our major client service partners. Because those starter roles that enable you to get into leadership are the ones that we actually have to work on and make sure that you're held accountable all the way throughout. The second thing we do is actually every leader actually has a responsibility in their scorecard for what they're doing, and it's both fact-based as well as efforts-based. And we actually have an accountability model that says, okay, your compensation is at risk this year if both the effort and the outcome is not there. And that's why we actually assess
So
with good
how
data.
are people doing?
They're doing good in most parts of the world, but not great in all parts of the world. And that's our challenge, as you look at the unconscious biases that exist in some parts of the world, and with some individuals, to be honest. So we've got to push harder, and that requires the tone at the top and what I call respective disruption. It requires leaders to get active, push hard, and intervene as necessary to make the change.
Roshni, let's talk about the changes that you're trying to drive now, and what the experience has been as you've gone about setting targets to make change.
So again, I think a point that people don't give enough attention to is a lot of people talk about diversity, but diversity without inclusion is also a big trap that a lot of organizations get into. Because I think that you keep chasing metrics of, I need to have, let's say, 50% women target by 2030, or you know, each team which is 5 and above should have at least one woman who is part of the team. Sometimes this gets crowded in the fact that inclusion is extremely important, because a lot of the times you start ticking off boxes and metrics, but the experience is not that great. So I think you know, we have, let's say at our organization, if I start from the top, we've got 4 women directors on our board. I think by all metrics, that's much more than perhaps in many boards, not just in India, but across the world. I think it's encouraging everyone around the table to have those conversations at the top, and all the women that we have in the board have been in leadership positions, have been executives. They've been on the other end and risen, and you know what changes they've made. So I think there's a lot of practices, practical practices to learn from of how it's done. Then in our particular industry, you know, at the entry level, we have 50% women freshers. Actually, the trouble starts happening at the leadership level. So how do we actually create a journey for them? And I'm still a believer that women also don't want to be put into quotas. We want to rise on merit. And I think providing that opportunity within, because you can do inorganic hiring, but culture takes time to change. And I think that if you're able to do it much more organically, and that takes time. I'm not saying we're there, but I think that takes time. But as Bob said, setting the mood on the top, working below, and I think there's a lot of discussion about generative AI, and a lot of discussion about how technology is going to change the world and how companies are going to operate better, efficiency, productivity. There's not so much discussion about how that's going to change the pyramid of how people and gender will be impacted. And I think, again, I don't have data points for that, but I think that's something that at least us at the board as well as me would be looking at very specifically, because those are the future opportunities.
Yeah.
And actually it's a clean slate. It's great to start. So I think that there's a lot to think.
There's plenty to think about, but Anish, you know, you're trying to move the needle within the Mahindra Group, but also as the president of FICCI, of one of the largest federations in India, you're trying to see what can be done to not just move the needle at the top, but across SMEs as well, because that's a problem area.
That's right, Shireen, and I would agree completely with Roshni, which is it's a culture that has to change. It's about an inclusive culture. It's not about metrics. It's not about quotas. That's because it's important for organizations. For a successful organization, having diversity of thought, diversity in our teams makes us better. And as our teams understand that, as our leaders understand that, that change is rippling through the organization. So at the Mahindra Group, we made significant strides in that. We looked at what are the various roadblocks in this journey. What are the various support mechanisms that women may need through their journey in their career, and how do we address that? As we've talked earlier, Shireen, we've got a maternity policy now that spans 5 years and gives a tremendous amount of support to women through that journey. So it's about creating that culture. It's about having the policies that are supportive, about having equality and inclusion as key elements of what we do every day. And on the FICCI front, this is important across India.
Yeah.
And therefore, women empowerment is one of the top priorities that we are driving this year. And we're working with a large number of stakeholders to try and get that on their agenda and then have them drive it as well.
But, you know, Bob, the economic potential of ensuring that there are more women participating in the formal economy, there are more women as part of the labor force. You know, the World Bank is going to be putting out its latest study, which will lay out the roadmap over the next few years on what most people need to do, what countries and organizations need to do. Is there an acknowledgement of the kind of economic impact, the economic benefits that the organizations will accrue if they do in fact move down this path?
Yeah, I think the business community now is much better positioned to make this a business opportunity, not necessarily just a societal doing good opportunity. And they see that commercial opportunity in a couple of ways. Number one, you get women in the workforce, they're more empowered, they're doing better, they have the ability to spend accordingly, right? So that's on a worldwide basis when you look at the broader topic of inclusion. Second thing is, as you look at the representation of women in leadership teams at the highest level, they're the ones that have different perspectives. Going back to the point Anish makes, which diversity of thinking is actually very beneficial for how we attack the marketplace and the opportunities and manage the business. And last but not least is, I do want to come back to this point on technology, because it's really important as you foreshadow ahead what's going to happen. The WEF and others are doing studies around this, and the real concern is you're going to have an opportunity with AI, but it will change radically the labor force. We already have issues in the labor force that exist today. We can't make this a compounding issue to the negative. It's got to be actually a compounding issue to the positive. So we've got to make definitive decisions at a commercial level with organizations in the business community, but we also have to make policy decisions on some of these things to enable better success in this regard. And that's where governments very much see that opportunity. You see it in India, specifically you see it in a couple other Asian countries as well, as you look at the opportunities of women participating in the workforce and the like. And I think that's going to be an opportunity, particularly when Asia, India and the like actually lead the way for this digital transformation. You
know, Roshni, let's talk about some of the measures that you've taken that have worked. And you know, you said that at the entry level you perhaps have more women coming in and than men, but it's the leaky pipe issue that is an issue everywhere. So, you know, anything that you've done to try and plug the gap that's working at this point in time?
So I think if I just set a little bit of a context, two things that I think that have been working in our organization. Number one, I think as women rise, they want to be in the same kind of roles that a lot of their male counterparts are. So, for example, we have a very large program that we run in the organization where at a particular time in your career, when you're about 5 years in or about 8 years in, which in itself in today's generation is a lifetime.
Yes.
So I think we have to also acknowledge that no longer is it 15, 20,
yes.
you know, moving them into sales roles. And I think they want to be in front of a customer and in front of a client. And that also gives a lot of practice and growth. So I think that having a program around that, and we have hundreds of women now within HCL who are going through that program. Many have moved on site as well, because I think that's a very important way to grow organically, and they get the exposure. They get to meet other people in the competitive landscape who they are up against when they meet clients. They get to understand what clients want. They get to understand macroeconomics. I think that these are extremely important factors. So that's on the, as they rise up the journey in the organization. I think there's something very important to look at innovation in even your fresher strategy and your talent engine, where you're sourcing from. I mean, today, for example, if we look at a country like India, India is the largest supplier of STEM women in the world. Of course, it's a function of our numbers as well. But if you, even outside STEM, India is the largest supplier of just women who are coming into the workforce from education. So what if you looked at the talent and, let's say, introduced, like we have, an early careers program, which is getting them in much before they go into universities, and they could be from the arts, they could be from science or from any other field. And we've got 10,000 now in the organization. 50% are women, and talking about economic sense, the 50% who are women actually come from the smaller towns, living in our smaller campuses, and the attrition is 2%. So I mean, at least in our industry, every quarter, attrition is a big discussion. So I think that thinking about navigating the talent landscape, navigating the geo landscape, or where you go and get talent from, and how they should work. So I think that you need both to work together to be able to think about creating organic success.
No, I agree with you completely. Anish, the things that you've done, the one thing that has worked really well, what's been the big success?
I think there are three areas. It's not one thing, it's not a simple solution. For us, it's about mindset, policies, and culture. From a mindset standpoint, we have to recognize the fact that this is important for the organization. And that leads to questions that we ask when we recruit, for example. Often at the senior level, executive search firms will tell us that we can't get any woman on the slate. And our response is, well, we won't start interviewing in that case. So let's put that extra effort in to make sure that we are treating this as an important topic. Second is policies. That's probably the easiest aspect. And there, as I said earlier, it's about understanding the journey, understanding what are the interventions required during that journey. The toughest is culture, because this is about creating an inclusive culture. It's about unconscious biases that exist. And often with the best intentions, there are unconscious biases that lead to a feeling among women that this is not a culture that is inclusive for us, that I'm looked at as different, right? It may be with the best intentions, but that parity has to be created. So it's not just about getting women in the organization or in certain positions. It's about ensuring that they thrive there, that they love the culture. And that is the work that's required across the organization, and we're putting a tremendous amount of effort on that front.
Baba, I want to come back and address the CEO survey, because last year when you did the survey, the possibility of companies existing 10 years on, that number has actually gone up this year, hasn't it? So what are CEOs mindful of? What are they fearful of the most today?
So the fact pattern is, last year about 39% of the CEOs thought they were not going to be economically viable if they didn't radically change their organizations to be fit for purpose going forward. That number has increased to 45% this year, and particularly acute in some parts of the world. India actually being one of them, as they look at the disruption and the external forces that are coming their way. That's actually a good news story, because they acknowledge the challenge is coming, and they have to do something about it. Now, one of the issues that actually is top of mind in that regard is, does my leadership team and does my organization have the right skill sets And am I able to attract the right talent to actually do all the things we're talking about? And this is where this concept of inclusion and equity becomes so much more so at the forefront of all that they're doing. So how do I create that right environment? And just if I can pick up on a little bit on what Anish said for a second, it's one thing to do maternity leaves, for example, to give people a fair shot at what's happening and recognize the work-life challenges, because you're never going to have work-life balance. It's actually all about candidly the flexibility and the equality that comes from that. But the reality is, in PwC, we did the studies that showed out of sight, out of mind, not good. So when people came back into the organization, they were rated lower. So we had to do a different policy change, which was actually, you are going to maintain your rating and your performance rating when you come back, because nothing's changed. You just happen to leave the organization for a little while. And these are the kind of things that are so important as to what data tells you what decisions to make, what policy to put in place. And that goes to, as you say, tone at the top, policies, as well as cultural organizational fit to make sure it's fit for purpose going forward.
So Roshni, road ahead, the priorities that you're going to be working on, what's the next big idea on this front?
So I think, again, from a business perspective, AI seems to be top of mind, and of course it's something that customers are looking at, and also the ecosystem around it. So around
you can't walk down Davos without seeing AI in some.
You cannot. But I think that a big priority for us is going to be the people pyramid and the people structure. We have outside HCLTech, but a part of the group, we have an education company. We have 2.6 million learners, and of the 2.6 million learners, 50% are women, and they're only doing full stack development and data science. So I think that that is also an indicator of the fact that they're hungry. There's a workforce out there which is digital natives. It's a tough one for a lot of organizations, because the more than 50% of each organization is currently dealing with Gen Zs and Gen Alphas, and they're very different. And leaders are not Gen Zs and Gen Alphas, and far from it. So I think that
you're closer to that.
No, I'm also millennial, but but it makes a big difference, because I think that we speak about diversity, inclusion, and culture. Culture is a very important discussion, as of course Anish has said, Bob has said as well. But it's not for women. They're part of the discussion. So I think that's very important, and not just women. I think inclusion of all. And it matters. So I think that when we think of new technologies coming in, new operating models which are going to come up, and how customers want us to deliver to them, I think diversity is going to play a big role, and people structures is going to be absolutely critical. At the end of the day, at least in our industry, we can keep saying we're a technology industry, but with 250,000 people,
it is very much a people-driven business still. Anish, priority for you?
First, on the female forward front, the success, in my view, is when we don't need to have these discussions anymore. When it's ingrained in the organization, we have inclusive cultures. From a business standpoint, the focus for us is continue to set bold targets and continue to deliver our commitments.
Bob, I'm going to give you the last word in terms of 2024, what the outlook is, what the mega trends are likely to be that could shape 2024.
You've got a couple of things on the forefront that people have to pay attention to. Clearly, the geopolitical agenda is top of mind for a lot, anecdotally. It's interesting, actually, in the CEO survey, it was lesser this year as a top risk. Still a risk, but lesser. And I think we have a timing point there, particularly when you look at the challenges in the Middle East. The second thing is, as was by the panel, AI and all implications associated with it. I do want to say, though, I do think we have probably overestimated the short term and underestimated the long term. You mentioned sort of Davos here and what's walking on the promenade like when you see everything AI. We were saying that 3 years ago with Meta.
And blockchain.
Absolutely. So we do need to be more methodical about what it means, but there is serious long-term labor force implications to that, and we got to pay attention to that. And the other aspect which we really haven't talked about is the implications of climate. So that actually has a big impact. Those two things are really disruptive to the economic environment that CEOs see. They know the external environment is going to force change. They've got to keep up. They've got to drive that change, and that comes from tone at the top, as well as the leadership team that they have at the senior levels and the middle management levels. And as you think about the topic we've just been discussing, that is so key to any effort to make change and get to the outcome and that equality that you're looking for.
Well, change is hard, but it can be done if there is commitment, there is will, and there is alignment between talk and action. Bob, Roshni and Anish, many thanks for joining us here very early in the morning here in Davos, but thanks very much. We appreciate your time and we wish you the very best of luck for 2024. Thanks for joining us here on CNBC-TV18. We are going to take a break here, but there's a lot more conversation. We will continue with our coverage here from Davos 2024. We're back with you in just a moment.